A warning before we begin, this episode contains references to sexual violence. From The Times and The Sunday Times, this is The Story. I'm Luke Jones. At the Hollywood premiere for the latest Lion King prequel, it looked like business as usual for the Carters. Shawn Carter, Jay-Z, was standing alongside two of the film's stars, his wife Beyoncé and his 12-year-old daughter. But the night before, a bombshell accusation had been revealed.
Rap mogul Jay-Z forcefully denying claims in a new lawsuit that he and Sean Diddy Combs sexually assaulted a minor at a party 24 years ago. Jay-Z said it's just an attempt at blackmail, and he called it, quote, idiotic.
Last week, Jay-Z, Shawn Carter, was named in a civil lawsuit in the US, accusing him of raping and drugging a woman when she was 13. It's alleged to have taken place in the year 2000, and it's alleged Sean Combs, P Diddy, took part as well. Both Carter and Combs strongly deny the claim. The woman making the accusation is anonymous, but this week did speak to the US network NBC.
I'm scared of what could happen, but I'm more afraid of letting it eat me alive from the inside out.
Carter hit back, saying there are inconsistencies in her account and the lawsuit should be dismissed.
In a statement to NBC News, Shawn Carter said, "This incident didn't happen. True justice is coming. We fight from victory, not for victory." A representative for Combs called the suit a shameless money grab. When we asked the woman about the contradictions, she said she stands by her statements. "I have made some mistakes," she said, in remembering what happened 24 years ago. "Honestly, what is the clearest is what happened to me."
There is a lot at risk for Jay-Z, one of the most significant and lucrative figures in American culture. So what is at stake? The story today, Jay-Z and the rape allegations.
My name's Craig MacLean. I'm a freelance arts journalist and a regular contributor to The Times and anyone else that will have me.
And in terms of how this has all emerged, in October we had a civil claim filed by an anonymous woman accusing Sean Combs, P Diddy, of drugging and raping her when she was 13. He strongly denies that. But they also mentioned this other high-profile celebrity man who was allegedly there as well. But at that point, they weren't named. When did you first hear about these allegations regarding Jay-Z?
So, news broke last Sunday.
That civil lawsuit filed against Combs in October was amended Sunday to include Jay-Z. The accuser, identified only as Jane Doe, says she was sexually assaulted by both men at a Video Music Awards after party in 2000.
This one was eyebrow-raising, given Jay-Z's profile, perceived good guyness, and status, really, as really a kind of cultural behemoth. I know that sounds kind of hyperbolic, but I think in his case it's appropriate.
Can I read you a bit of Jay-Z's statement that he put out? He says that his lawyer received a blackmail attempt, he calls it, called a demand letter from in his quote marks, lawyer named Tony Busby. What he had calculated was the nature of these allegations and the public scrutiny would make me want to settle. No, sir, it had the opposite effect. It made me want to expose you for the fraud you are in very public fashion. He says, "My heart and support goes out to true victims in the world who have had to watch how their life story is dressed in costume for profitability by this ambulance chaser in a cheap suit. You have made a terrible error in judgment, thinking that all celebrities are the same. I'm not from your world. I'm a young man who made it out of the project in Brooklyn. We don't play your games." What do you make of that?
It's a forceful, impassioned, eloquent, and you might say two-fingered response. He isn't taking this lying down. Jay-Z, from these words, I stress that, seems genuinely outraged that, as he put it, such a heinous allegation could have been made against him. Obviously, anyone who's a master of the pen, as Jay-Z is, he's widely regarded as maybe the greatest hip-hop writer and rapper, two different things, of all time. He is a master of the syllable, far less master of the word. So you'd expect him to come back fighting, but that statement is pretty stark.
And accusing the lawyer in the civil suit of blackmail, I should say for his part, the lawyer Tony Busby said in a statement, quote, "No one has made any threats. Jay-Z's assertions are bogus and laughable. Instead, our firm sent a standard demand letter seeking mediation on behalf of a woman who alleges Jay-Z sexually assaulted her as a minor," which, as we've said, Jay-Z has strongly denied that. He mentioned in his statement about being a young man who made it out the projects in Brooklyn. Take us back to that time, because it is a real rags to riches story that he has. What do we mean by the projects?
Yeah, so the projects, housing estates, as we call them in England, housing schemes, as we call them in Scotland. It's a tough childhood he had. Absent father, he was only reconciled with, I think, 3 years before his father's death, well into Jay-Z's adulthood. He started selling drugs in his teenage years. This was, by all accounts, by no means unusual career path, shall we say, for young men, mainly young men, in New York at that time. He transcended that quite quickly. He had his eyes on the prize as not just a musician, but as a businessman, as an entrepreneur. Quickly became a local figure in the hip-hop scene, and by his mid-20s, before even releasing an album, had set up his own record label.
And is it right that he was selling CDs out the boot of his car? I mean, that's how that label started.
Yeah, he goes from selling drugs on street corners to selling CDs on street corners. And he makes no bones about that life of early criminality. He writes about it. Did he celebrate it? He kind of did celebrate it in his early rhymes, but I don't know whether you'd say he valorised it. I think he's as better aware than anyone of the short life expectancy or the short freedom expectancy if you engage in that kind of life. And he was indeed shot at, apparently, on 3 separate occasions.
In fact, our colleague Will Hodgkinson on The Times, referring to his first album, Jay-Z's first album, Reasonable Doubt, which was 1996, he refers to it as a masterpiece of ghetto realism. Yeah. And there is a lot of that drug dealing world in that album. When did it become clear that actually he was a bit more of a star and an innovator?
The first 2 records, Reasonable Doubt and In My Lifetime Volume 1, they were statements of intent. You get to the blueprint in 2001, and that is just a blockbuster record. Kanye West, then at the peak of his production powers as the new kid on the block. Classic songs galore on that record, and despite coming out around 9/11, managed to go on to become a kind of defining cornerstone album in hip-hop culture. I think it's in the Library of Congress now as a totem of American culture. So that really presented him as somebody who, yes, could still appeal to the projects, to the ghetto, but also could appeal to wider, whiter America.
And especially in those early 2000s, in doing that, I mean, well, case in point, this is where I sort of started to become aware of him because of things like him featuring on Crazy in Love with Beyoncé, who'd later be his wife.
You look at the early 2000s, and this allegation dates from 2000. So that whole timeline is interesting if you look at it now. The following year, him and Beyoncé are on the cover of Vanity Fair, and in that interview, they talk about how they're kind of dating. They're playing it a little bit coy. The next year, they do their collaborative song, "03 Bonnie and Clyde." It's a Jay-Z song. She's the featured artist. The year after that, 2003, they do "Crazy in Love." He's the featured artist. She's the lead. The year after that, they win a Grammy for it. Each of them are becoming bigger and bigger and bigger. Individually, they each amplify the other.
Yes.
In their artistry and in their celebrity.
It was a little bit later after this, so 2006, am I right in saying, that you were on a private jet with Jay-Z?
Yes, so...
What was happening there?
2006, it was his private jet, not mine, to be clear.
Good to clarify.
Yeah, 2006, for a newspaper magazine feature, I went to South Africa to meet Jay-Z and his crew. I think there was 44 people in this crew. And he was doing a tour of southern Africa. He'd been in Angola, Gabon, Lesotho, I think, and then South Africa, where I joined him. And there was 2 or 3 different shows around South Africa. He was leading this UN campaign that him and Kofi Annan had met in the previous summer in the United Nations HQ in New York. And it was about bringing clean drinking water to huge swathes of southern Africa, or Africa in general.
I was looking for a cause to attach myself to, and water seemed like number one on the list, is the most basic of needs. So I was going to neighborhoods and experiencing how people were still living in 2006, and I was playing concerts.
He was doing it because, as he said at one point to an audience in one of the shows I saw, I'm coming back to Africa. So it was him as a black man from America going back to the motherland. You know, it was interesting to me to note that no other artist of conscience, quote unquote, had at that point toured Africa. Not Coldplay, not U2, not Madonna. They might have done one-off things, but they hadn't actually toured. He was putting his boots on the ground and touring. He was also putting his private jet on the ground at a cost of $700,000 a day or something ridiculous. There was an MTV documentary crew following him to make a doc about this water campaign.
Naturally.
You might say to publicise the campaign. You might say to publicise Jay-Z's ambassadorial bona fides.
A lot of times you donate to charity and, you know, you don't know what happens. You hope and you pray and you close your eyes. Yes, but, you know, I was on the ground and got to, you know, experience it. So that was...
He was also, more uncomfortably for me, shooting a fashion campaign for his clothing label, Rockaware, being shot by Mark Seliger, who then was a huge Rolling Stone photographer, and he still is a very big photographer. And at one stop, we went to, a shanty town that was as grim as that word conjures. And the idea was to get, in essence, Jay-Z with lots of barefoot little children thronging around him as if he was the Messiah while he's wearing crisp Rockaware and Mark Seliger is shooting away. It's like something at a Zoolander. And I remember thinking, this is weird. This feels like hypocritical. And I asked that question to him, and he said, look, when I lived in the projects, if somebody had come to my neighbourhood and, you know, they were famous and brought a buzz and were handing out water and all that, I would have said, great, that brightened up our day. That said, you know, I was welcomed aboard the private jet for 4 days, albeit kept at a distance up the back of the plane from Jay-Z and his crew, who included Beyoncé. She was on the tour as well. I was under strict instructions not to approach her at any point. She spent most of the time doing Sudoku with a pen clutched in her fist like a little kid.
Interesting.
Very quiet.
I wonder if she can do the Times super fiendish.
Well, that can be a question for next week's podcast.
Yeah.
So he was a great interview. You know, he exudes charisma. He exudes benevolence as well, you might say. He's got a kind of peculiar Elmer Fudd from Bugs Bunny type laugh, which was quite humanizing in a way. And he clearly had ambitions beyond music. Philanthropy was genuinely part of it. But then he was also developing his own colour, Jay-Z Blue, which had a bit of platinum dust in it, apparently. So, and this is alongside his interests in sports, alcohol, hospitality, fashion, etc. So, you know, the sky was not even the limit. The galaxy was the limit.
Craig, we're talking about Jay-Z. He's in the headlines because he's been named in this civil lawsuit. He's accused of raping a 13-year-old girl in the year 2000, something he has very strongly denied in a statement which he released through his label. He's actually accused the lawyer involved of blackmail. But we're hearing about his rise to fame, the growth of his empire, and how he really came through as a mainstream success and a businessman, which you slightly touched on there, on top of all his philanthropy and the rest. Jay-Z certainly moved, I don't know, in the early 2000s and onwards, more and more mainstream. Was he the person that made hip-hop mainstream, would you say?
I would say it's reasonable to say that, albeit in tandem with collaborators like Beyoncé and with Kanye. I mean, Empire State of Mind is probably not his best flow, but
It's a great song.
It's a great song. It's his most popular song on Spotify currently. But his lyricism in that, which does call back to his childhood again. You know, he's still tapping into where he came from to burnish his credentials as someone who's street real. But, you know, he begins, yeah, I won't rap, you'll be pleased to know. Yeah, I'm out of that Brooklyn, now I'm down in Tribeca, right next to De Niro. And since I made it here, I can make it anywhere. Little Sinatra nod there. I used to cop in a Harma, Hola, my Dominicanos, little nod to drug dealing there. Took to my stash pot, 560 State Street, which I'm guessing is where he used to hide his drugs. Cruising down 8th Street, off-white Lexus, drive so slow, but BK is from Texas, Beyoncé. So in those, 10 lines, he has crammed in so much about his own history, the cultural history of New York, featuring Frank Sinatra, his drug dealing past, his ability to transcend that, the fact that Robert De Niro is now his neighbour. That's all in the first couple of verses, and it just goes boom, 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 and he's so good at that. So yes, I think it's very fair to say that he popularised hip-hop, not just as a musical force, but as a cultural force.
Thinking about his mainstream success, 2008, he will have arrived on many people's radar because he headlined Glastonbury, and that was quite a moment.
That certainly was a moment.
First rapper to do it.
Yeah, the first rapper. Certain loudmouth figures in the British music industry, let's say the white guitar playing faction of British music, Noel Gallagher, being the complainer-in-chief, said something along the lines of,
"Sorry, but Jay-Z, no, I'm not having hip-hop at Glastonbury. No way, no.
Hip-hop at Glastonbury, I'm not having it." Remarkably, there was a lot of semi-serious debate about this. You know, is Glastonbury the place for hip-hop? As if to say that only white meat and potato guitar bands can play Glastonbury, or at a push some white British rave acts can play it, as Orbital had done very successfully. And of course, you know, Jay-Z played an absolute blinder when he came on stage. I was in the crowd that night, as foggy memory tells me. First of all, he played little snippets of Noel's grumpy-ass interview over the PA before he came on, over kind of flickering imagery on the screens at the back. And then he just launches into a genius version of Wonderwall, playing a Stratocaster. Or, well, I say playing, quote-unquote playing. Holding a guitar certainly, and peeling out the riffs to Wonderwall. It was the most devastatingly powerful, simple, and undermining response to all that nonsense that was spouted by Noel and others in advance. And it was a legendary set.
Yes. Around this time, he's also getting very, very rich, isn't he? Because as you said, he's not just becoming a bigger and bigger music success, he's doing his philanthropy, he's also turning into quite the businessman. You mentioned his clothing line there, but what other pies does he have his finger in?
Yeah, so Rockaware, when I met him, and that's 18 years ago, it was doing something like $700 million a year in sales just from the clothing line. Oof. He then had a sports bar in New York called 4040, I think it's called, as a spirits brand. He had real estate interests. He had sports franchise interests. He went on to become the president or CEO or both of Def Jam Records. So he went from the studio to the boardroom, and he was turning up to the office in a suit and tie, being a proper record label exec. Currently, his estimated worth is $2.5 billion, give or take the odd million. You know, he's got 24 Grammys, and the only person who equals that in hip-hop is Kanye. His success across multiple fields is unparalleled. Even Diddy, at his most Roman, shall we say, didn't have as wide an empire. So he's unparalleled in that scale.
And he had this empire, Jay-Z, but also he had what seemed like the perfect home life as well. Having Beyoncé as a wife, they were a creative couple, but also they seemed like a genuine, happy love match. Until rumours started to circulate in around 2014 that perhaps he'd been unfaithful.
Until Liftgate.
Liftgate. Explain Liftgate.
So there was CCTV footage captured inside a lift of Jay-Z with Solange, Beyoncé's sister, and Solange attacking him.
Quite a fierce hit.
Yeah. Now, as I recall, there's not audio on this, but it came to be seen that this was her lamping him for being unfaithful to her sister. And then you have Beyoncé writing a song with the immortal line, Becky with the good hair.
Yes, on the Lemonade album.
Yes, which is allegedly a reference to this mysterious woman who's never been categorically identified.
And then this was, as we get further on the chronology, coming at a time where some of those around him and his peers are starting to get in trouble. We've obviously had the imprisonment of R. Kelly. We've got P. Diddy facing very serious charges, which he denies. Do you think any of that affected Jay-Z, or did he just stand separate from that?
I think he did stand largely separate from that. Currently, there's no proof of any guilt or any heinous acts on his part. Until last weekend, I think he did manage to stand quite clear of it.
And also becoming a real establishment figure within the culture as well. I mean, even recently, hasn't he had some exhibition at the Brooklyn Public Library going through all of his history of lyrics?
Yeah, the Book of Hov ran at the Brooklyn Public Library last year. The library had a 74% increase in visitor numbers in that period. 600,000 people came, and they learned about young Shawn Carter's life in the Marcy Projects. They learned about hip-hop culture. There was lots and lots of iconography from his career there. His lyrics were projected on the walls. There was his guitar from Glastonbury. I'll read you a quote, if I may, from the book, from Linda E. Johnson, who's the president and CEO of Brooklyn Public Library. She wrote in her introduction, describing the scenes last year. Strangers sang together, swapped concert stories, and debated their favourite lyrics. As they waited in line, visitors looked up to the library's facade and marvelled at the words of a local poet proudly displayed in a public space. Words that represented the often overlooked stories of so many in the borough. Words that challenged us all to write a better future. She also said, and again, speaking to his artistry, and it speaks to the foundational part he plays in modern American culture, not just hip-hop culture. She said, Jay-Z's lyricism challenges us to confront inequality and reinvent societal norms. As one of Brooklyn's finest, he is an inspiration to millions, and his story belongs in the library, one of the most democratic institutions in the United States. So that speaks to the augustness in which he's held by, these temples and totems of culture in America in particular.
Which makes this a very dangerous moment for him, doesn't it? If that's the esteem he's held in, and yet, let's not forget, there is someone who was 13 who says in 2000 they were raped by him and Sean Combs. Both of them have strongly denied that, of course, but it could be a dangerous moment for Jay-Z.
100%. It doesn't take much for the shine to be knocked off, particularly when you're at that exalted level, when you are being valorized in a big library in your home neighborhoods. Obviously, these institutions don't want any taint or any association with anything even allegedly heinous. There's that threat to his good guy local hero image, for sure. There's also the threat to the business empire. Rock Nation, which is part of his umbrella of organizations, they are production partners on the Super Bowl halftime show. You can imagine that the NFL, who are obviously fiercely protective of their brand. So what are these allegations going to do to that partnership? There's going to be a lot of worried faces around the NFL table as we head into the festive period, thinking that 6 weeks from the new year, the biggest concert showcase in the world is happening, partly made by a production company co-headed by someone who's just been accused of rape. The problem for Jay-Z is that the longer that it rumbles on, the more that questions are asked, the more that there's deep dives into his past. And all that stuff can't help but put dents in the armour, shall we say, take the lustre off the armour. So it's in his interests for it to be resolved quickly, but it's also in his interest for it to be resolved with full justice served to all parties. It's a horribly complex situation with, let's not forget, as you say, a traumatized woman at the heart of it. No one's coming out of this with anything less than pain being caused.
If you've been affected by any of the issues in this podcast, we have put some links and helplines in the description notes of this episode, which you might find useful. We heard today from Craig MacLean, arts journalist and contributor to The Times. You can follow all the latest developments in Jay-Z's case at thetimes.com or in print. And if you want to know more about the allegations facing Sean Combs, P Diddy, then why not listen back to our episode which detailed all of those claims. We'll put a link to that in the episode notes. And if you enjoyed listening to this episode and found it interesting, why not send a link along to a friend who might also enjoy it as well. That is it from us today. The producer was Sam Chantarasak, the executive producer was Will Rowe, and sound design and theme composition was by Mauro Seto. I'm Luke Jones. See you soon.